When we hear the word America, we think of skyscrapers, presidents, Hollywood, and global power. But long before the United States existed, before the Revolution, before the colonies, there was another world here. A world of ancient peoples, of massive settlements, of trade networks stretching across thousands of miles. This story does not begin 250 years ago. It begins over 15,000 years ago. The first humans arrive. During the last ice age, sea levels were much lower than today. Between Siberia and Alaska, there was once a massive land bridge known as Beringia. Small groups of hunter-gatherers crossed into an entirely new continent. They did not know they were entering a new world. They were simply following animals. They hunted mammoths. They crafted stone spear points. They adapted to harsh, freezing climates. Over generations, they spread southward. Across forests, plains, deserts, and mountains. Within thousands of years, humans had reached the southernmost tip of the Americas. The continent was no longer empty. It was home. The rise of civilizations. Over time, nomadic hunters became farmers. They began cultivating crops, especially maize or corn. Permanent villages appeared. Trade expanded. Social hierarchies developed. One of the most remarkable cultures was the Mississippian civilization. Near present-day Illinois stood a massive urban center known as Cahokia. At its height, around 1050 to 1200 AD, Cahokia may have had 20,000 to 30,000 residents. For comparison, London at that time was smaller. Cahokia featured enormous earthen mounds, religious and ceremonial centers, a complex political structure. This was not a primitive society. It was an organized civilization with engineering, agriculture, religion, and long-distance trade. And it thrived centuries before Europeans arrived. A continent of nations. By the time Europeans reached North America, millions of indigenous people lived across the continent. There was not one culture. There were hundreds. In the Northeast, powerful confederacies such as the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, formed sophisticated political alliances. On the Great Plains, nations followed vast buffalo herds. In the Southwest, communities built multi-story homes into cliffs and desert landscapes. Along the Pacific Northwest, monumental totem poles rose above coastal villages. There were diplomats, warriors, farmers, traders, spiritual leaders. Trade networks stretched across thousands of miles. Shells from the Gulf Coast have been found in the Midwest. Copper from the Great Lakes traveled far south. This was a dynamic, interconnected world. And it had existed for millennia. 1492, a turning point. In 1492, an expedition led by Christopher Columbus reached the Caribbean. Europe had entered the story. At first, contact seemed limited. But soon, European powers realized that vast lands lay across the Atlantic. Spain began aggressive expansion. France explored the north. England turned its eyes toward the eastern coastline. But Europeans did not come alone. They brought smallpox, measles, influenza, diseases that indigenous populations had never encountered. In some regions, up to 80 to 90% of the population died within decades. Entire villages disappeared. Civilizations weakened. The balance of power shifted permanently. The continent would never be the same again. The first English colonies. In 1607, England established Jamestown in Virginia, the first permanent English settlement in North America. Life was brutal. Food shortages, disease, internal conflict, harsh winters. Many colonists did not survive the first years. At one point, during what became known as the starving time, settlers resorted to desperate measures to survive. But Jamestown endured. Over time, more colonies formed along the eastern coast. 13 colonies would eventually emerge. And with them, a new society began to take shape. The end of one era, the beginning of another. America did not begin in 1776. It began thousands of years earlier, when the first humans crossed a frozen land bridge. It grew through the rise of powerful indigenous nations. It transformed with the arrival of Europeans. By the 17th century, a new chapter had begun. Colonial settlements expanded. Indigenous nations were displaced. European rivalries intensified. And within the next century, revolution would erupt. A new nation would be born. The United States. But that is another story. Subscribe, and discover more hidden stories waiting for you.